Hello and welcome to Common Sense SEO Show number 13, where we're going to start digging into the wonderful world of schema and knowledge graphs and so on and so forth. I'm afraid I am once again echoey because I did buy another headset, but it's waiting to go back. And let's say no more about that. So you're going to have to put up with a little bit of echo from me, I'm afraid, for a little while. But before I go on too much, let's hand over to Henrik. Hello, Henrik, and what have you got to tell us as regards to housekeeping?
Hello, Tony. I would like to have one, if you can all hear us, and two, if you can see Tony on the screen at the moment. Yep. So, Tony.
Yes, well, of course, what Henrik was meant to have told you just then was don't forget, subscribe, like, and even join in the Skype conversation if you are a Skype addict, as other groups move away from Skype looking in search of better things, because we are there. It's a small group at the moment, and it seems that more people are leaving than joining just at the moment. But we've not, I must admit, we've sort of neglected it. But however, we will be in there and answering questions a lot better, especially over this month, because we're going to be talking about schema and knowledge panels. Now, where did this all come about? Well, you can say that schema's been around for many, many years, which of course it has, but it's definitely come into focus a lot more over the current, past 12 months or so. It's definitely becoming more topical since Google announced the fact that they were going to focus in on schema for a lot of their future activities. Now, some of that promise is sort of going off in different directions at the moment, but nevertheless, schema, as you can see when you do a search, schema is definitely featuring more and more predominantly or prevalently in a search result. For example, the knowledge panel, knowledge graph, those sorts of things, they're driven by schema. And wouldn't it be great if we could get our information at the top of the Google search in what is known as Google P0? I have tried, and I'm not going to say I've failed, because that would be sort of like, who would I be here to tell you about this today if I had? Now, no. What it is we've been looking at in depth at this, and it's amazing the sort of things we've uncovered. And Henrik has got some real sort of in-depth stuff to go over, and it's not all going to be today. I'm not going to promise you the answers to everything today. We're going to really make this a topic over the whole of April, and we're really going to walk away from April in the knowledge and hope that everybody around that sees the show, etc., knows as much about the knowledge panels and getting in the knowledge panel, etc., as we do, and we want to see people start appearing in there. That's our hope and our aim. When I was doing the entity testing a few weeks ago, you may have seen the entity blending test and the hashtag test that we did a couple of weeks ago as well. Now, this was all leading up to, well, it's all based around schema anyway. And what it was I did a search a while ago, and this is just one small little thing. And I noticed that Google kept, I'm in the UK, as you probably already know, Google kept serving up snippets from America. And I thought, well, surely there's got to be a way of me getting in there. If I could just put a pound sign in front of what they're saying, surely that would make it more relevant, more topical, more useful to their searchers. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite that easy, so we had to dig a little bit deeper. So I started looking around the ideas of branding and entity, because I realized you had to have some authority to get you up into that Google P0 as well. So we started digging into all of that sort of thing, trying to find out a lot more about that. When I did the Tony Graham, I was trying my hardest to get my name up there instead of this mass murderer who's down the road from me in Lincoln Prison, or the footballer who's just taken over at Blackpool United or whatever they're called, I don't know. Anyway, or the cheesy cabaret singer from Los Angeles, I think. So in an attempt to try and get me into that Google knowledge panel, it became quite difficult. And while I was trying to merge all the entities together, I kept saying to Google, I said, look, that's me there. And you sort of give me credit for that and start linking this with my other entities. And they were going, oh, no, that's a Google My Business entity, or, oh, no, that's a something else entity, whatever. And I suddenly realized that this whole topic is far, far, far more complex than it. Well, for the layperson, it's definitely very complex. And there has to be an easy way. Luckily, I know Henrik, and you guys mostly know Henrik as well, and he has been diving deep into some of the Google sort of treasure troves to find out many of the ways that can help us to get to the top of Google. We are starting to see results. Of course, we're seeing results now. It's this stuff is just, but the stuff that we're uncovering is mind blowing. Some of it is. What we want to do is bring you the logical steps first, so that you can understand how to get up to the top, up to that Google page zero, without sort of blowing your minds with some of the way out science that you start opening up as you get more familiar with it. So I think as an introduction, that is pretty much it. There was one last thing, Henrik, before I just hand over to you. There's one last thing I will say. Now, people talk about getting ranked in Google from the perspective of keywords. We hear that everywhere. We hear it all around. And on-page SEO, it all seems to focus at the moment around keywords. Keywords in your H1, in your H2, whether this one is a ranking factor, whether that's a rank. And it's, yes, on-page SEO is obviously very, very important, and it helps you build authority. It helps you get the ranking. It helps you get above your competitors. But if you start implementing that along with the things that we're going to be talking about today, then everything becomes a whole lot easier. And Henrik, I would like you now to take center stage and explain why.
Okay, thank you, Tonis. I just need to share my screen here. So, okay, guys, can you see my screen where it says knowledge panel and knowledge-based trust? Please give me a little tick for that, and one in the chat. That will be fine. Yes, okay, let's hit it. Well, as Tony said, knowledge panels is something you can actually draw if you can draw a Google 3-pack map. Then you might be able to draw a knowledge panel on a Google search where your company's information will be shown up at the right side of the search results. So let's dig a little bit into knowledge panels and what Google call knowledge-based trust. So I have been down the rabbit hole, and what Google defines as knowledge vaults is actually trust database, or trust reliable databases like Wikipedia, like Freebase, like Yahoo, like Nell, DBpedia, Microsoft Satori, and Google owns Knowledge Graph. So when they need to verify an entity, oh, sorry, I need to tell that the verticals for that is, of course, Facebook and the social media network, where they can verify information like LinkedIn, the people graph there, and Amazon on the product graph. So all in all, what Google is trying to do is trying to verify the information that they find on the website. That could be either structured data or unstructured data. But the more structured data that you can give Google, the better, and the easier they can get the feeling of what is your website is about. So what I found was a little citation saying that we know that sources' trustworthiness provides an additional signal for evaluating the quality of a website. We discuss new research opportunities for improving it and using it in conjunction with existing signals such as the PageRank. Interesting. So what they're looking for is actually, can they verify the information that they have on a website? And some of the factors that they're doing is that One, they're trying to avoid evaluating KPTs on topic irrelevant triples. And as I say, we need to identify the main topics of a website and filter triples whose entities or predicate is not relevant to these topics, which means that they'll crawl your website or try to identify what is the website is about, or the page is about, or the post is about, and they'll try to filter all what they call noise away from it. And that they're doing that by evaluating what they call KPTs on trivial extracted triples, where they need to decide whether the information is a trivial triple. And what they do is they consider a predicate with a very low variety of objects as a less informative, or they will try to look at another possibility to associate triples with what they call inverse document frequency, and give that what you call a lower weight in the computation. And then they look at the extractors, where they still have limited extracting capabilities, and this limit is the ability maybe to just extract one triple or several triples. But in theory, what they're doing is they try to extract as much as possible using a method called OpenEI style information extraction techniques. And those are used when the data on the website doesn't conform to schema. So what they're still working on is to find better ways to enhance these extractors. And the fourth factor they're looking at is, as I say, some websites scrape data from other websites. So identifying such websites require techniques such as copy detection, and scaling up on copy detection is one of their priorities in order to reach what they call a reasonable knowledge-based trust indicator. So what is a triple? Triple is a semantic atomic data entity in the resource description format, or RFD or RDF format, and that's being a subject, predicate, and an object. So if we take, for example, the car has the color black, then the subject is the car, the predicate has the color, and the object is black. So Google will be looking for these three factors within a sentence in order to detect as much as possible to see what's the paragraph the post is about and relate that to the topic of the website. So when, as Tony said, maybe keywords is being putting a little bit on the side instead of what you call ontology, where there's a definition of possible types of entities and relationships and the attributes of those entities. So what you could say, if Google finds an entity and find a related entity in the neighborhood, or has linked to authority pages outside your website or within the website, it has a possibility to justify whether your content is authoritative, i.e. is trustworthy. And that's what they're trying to figure out. The extractors, they will look for subjects, predicates, and objects, as we mentioned before. And here I have taken the post that I have made for the show on our blog. and I have run it through Google AI analyzer, and you can see it will try to relate the different words, either will define what's an adverb, what's a predicate, what's a verb, what's a noun, and it will give it some indicators as the, let's say, authoritative of it. And we will come back to how you can do that in a later show or in a later documentation for it, but it is possible to get a feeling of how Google will evaluate your post on the web. So what is your way to the knowledge graph? That is using extensive schema on your website, on your page, on your post. And what you should do, you should have a schema for each individual web page of the type web page. So it will be a definition of a thing, creative work, and the creative work will be a web page, and there's tons of properties that you can fill in that schema, and we'll come back to that in another show, how we do that. So use schema as much as possible. Get in a Wikipedia page if possible. Get in Wikidata if possible. And then, of course, having your Google My Business for your local business or your national business. Get online press releases with verifying your brand and your brand identity. And what you should use, on which we know that Google is looking at, they're looking at the first section of the About Us page to get an idea what your website is about. So if you look at an organic search and you get a rich snippet for a question, then you will normally click on that question, and the question will take you to an answer on a page. But if you look at how Google would direct you to the answer, it's not on the top of the page, it's to a section of the page. So one could argue that Google is able to actually index a part of your page rather than the page in itself. And that's a little bit contradiction to what they mentioned in this paper about the knowledge-based trust, because they're looking at the website as a whole, because they will have to evaluate whether there is other parts of the site that validates the information they find on the post, or if there's other part of the website that's linking out to an authority site and validating your information. So what you should consider is to have a big arsenal of tools when you want to make sure that you are in the knowledge graph and validate your brand or your website. And as Tony said, he was trying to get Tony Grant into the knowledge panel and had a little bit of difficulties when he was signing up for the knowledge panel ID. But we'll get there and get him in. So that's one of the tests that we will need to do in the near future here. What I want to talk a little bit about is the Link Open Data Cloud. The Link Open Data Cloud is a database of data sets where you have a possibility to get in if you're using a tool like the WordLift plugin for WordPress sites, where you will mark up all the schema, where you can identify your own entities, where you can create your own knowledge panel, where it requires to get in that specific link, or the linked open data cloud. It require a minimum of 1,000 triples, but that could easily be done on a web page if you mark them up and using a tool like the word lift. This is an initiative started by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the HTML language, and that will be an opportunity to have your own knowledge graph not controlled by Google. So definitely that's something you should be looking into, how you can create your own knowledge graph using the data entities on your website and providing the schema that will support that data set that you're trying to get into that knowledge graph. What else? Again, use schema to help Google to classify your web page or your website, what your website site is about. Use NLP categories, that's natural language processing categories, which is an AI that Google has, and it has a lot of categories. So if you can categorize yourself, like using same as to point to the categories or to your Wikidata, that will be an awesome idea. And as I said, learn about the linked open data principles, and then build your knowledge graph to get your website and web page up into the top of Google. So that's basically what I want to cover in regard to the knowledge panel, how to get into the knowledge panel for this little show, because we are running up a little bit. And Tony, do you have anything to comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about schema is that it seems, when you first start trying to wrap your head around it, it seems incredibly complex for whatever reason. It did to me. I don't know why. It just, because I did coding as part of a degree, but for whatever reason, it still felt a little bit, it wasn't just HTML. Well, people will argue it is, but I mean, it just seemed different. And I don't know why. I don't know why I had this sort of, I don't know, adverse reaction to it. I kept pushing it to one side thinking, I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it, whatever. It'll go away. And of course it doesn't. But the thing is the more you actually make it part of your sort of development process, the more understandable it becomes. I mean, when I started to get to grips with schema, then if I started to, maybe if I then leapt forward into entities and all the rest of it, it would have been like, oh my God, what's going on now? And even some of the tools that we've been looking at over the last week or so, tools that analyze your text, and you can drop passages of text and it takes it down to micro levels, analyzing and really builds up the meaning of what you write. And I think what that highlights to me is not only do we have to understand about the schema so that we can declare our entities and our the meanings of the words, etc., in the context of our posts, so that it becomes more easier for Google to identify the meaning of our page. I just think that it also highlighted to me the fact that we need to keep language simple as well, because we need to try and remove the ambiguities that are so easy.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So I thought you were going to say something else as well then. But it's I can't remember what the example was, Henrik, when we was talking the other day, and there was this ambiguity there. And even when you look at some very simple sentences, you suddenly think, well, hang on a minute. If you pause at that point instead of that point, it means something completely different. And I know that's what punctuation is there for, but in the absence of punctuation, people will read it how they want to read it, not necessarily how you've written it. So therefore, you have to try. And one of the things that they always used to say was, when you was writing, this is way, way, way back when I first started on the internet, and when people used to teach you how to write a long letter sales copy, it was always write as if you're writing to a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, because that's the average age of the reader. Not the average age, sorry, the average reading ability of the people that will be reading your pages. So if you sort of dumb down your language to a common denominator, you're more likely to get engagement, and you're more likely to get clarity and understanding of what you've written. And I find that quite difficult because, the way I waffle on here, you can tell I'm full of words. I've got far too many. I'm running out of time to say them all. But, you see, so with me, I've got a habit of writing rather flowery, as we call it in English, whereas that's unnecessary. In a way, I have to keep beating myself up and bringing it back down to its basics, and then reading it again and saying, now, does that make sense? If I read that tomorrow, would it still make absolute sense in the context of what I'm trying to say? So this is where you need to sort of try and get down to that level. Use a schema to highlight the words that will lead to the understanding of your page, and so that Google can clearly identify the snippets on your page that are worthy of getting into the knowledge panel. Is that making sense, Henrik?
Yeah. What we should emphasize as well is that if you can bring a structure to your website for the bot to crawl, i.e., if you silo your content properly and support that by schema, and can explain in schema to Google what is this site about, then you are actually having what you could call a greater likelihood of being looked at as an authoritative website. And that's what it's about. Is your content trustworthy? And if you find ambiguity, then it might not. Google in itself, in a paper, made a good example. It analyzed a lot of web pages, and the thing was about, where was Obama born? Was he born in Kenya, or was he born in the US and North America? And if you analyzed 8 or 10 websites, argued that he was from Kenya, and 12 was arguing he was from North America. But the bot can't distinguish between whether it was fake news or real news. So the more that it can verify that information against, for instance, a Wikipedia page, which is believed to be more authoritative than just a simple website, then the score will be higher for those results that they have found on those in favor of a North American rather than on the Kenya. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the thing is, we've just spent half an hour talking about this. This is an in-depth topic. So don't go away thinking that, well, hang on a minute, I still don't know how to get into the knowledge path. Stick with us over this month, because honestly, by the time you get to the end of this month, you will have an amazing, well, hopefully we'll have a deep understanding. We will try and get some examples. If we can find nailed on, once we've, some of the tests that we've got out there, once we know which ones are working, then we will share those with people on the show, etc. Because we want you to be able to see how this works. Obviously, there's on-page to do, there's your ambiguity, disambiguation, all those sorts of things that you've got to take in mind. So unfortunately, because they are microanalyzing the text on your page, you are not going. It's not something you can game. Really, it's not. It's more about teaching yourself to write with the end goal in mind. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. It's about good practice, really, which is ultimately what Google are looking for anyway. So this is where we're leading towards. It is an in-depth topic, and we can't just nail it all in 30 minutes, unfortunately. Is there any quick questions before we sort of head off as well? Because we are reaching that 30-minute point, unfortunately.
No. Do you have any questions out there, guys?
I mean, I would, while we're waiting to see if any do pop in, I would suggest we will drop a link in later on into the Skype group. I'd suggest that people probably want to pop in there. And if anybody's got any more questions about this topic, we will keep the discussion going in there. Honestly, it's it's an immense topic, and that's why we're sort of really going to focus in through the whole of April on this topic. Anybody sort of got any comments, or are we sort of going to put this one to bed for a week and let people's brains melt and start up again in another week's time? I think
Terry says that this is great info, guys. I hope everyone watches this twice. But otherwise, there's not many questions here. So,
okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Terry, for that. I appreciate your support and your kind words, and I appreciate your in-depth understanding and research as well, Henrik. This is some amazing stuff that's coming out today and over the next couple of weeks. So do join back. Oh,
there's one way question. So this has primarily been about the knowledge panel. How applicable is this to snippets as well? Might you address the snippets in the future? Yes, we will address snippets in the future, but it's an overall part. The snippets is your schema that comes into force, so that whenever you do proper schema on a page, you have a likelihood to come up into the rich snippets. But again, as we said, if you have a high trust factor at Google, then the likelihood for the unstructured data to come into the rich snippet might appear. So it's a dual process that you have to make sure that you're wording your content properly, as Tony just said, but also that you actually put in a lot of schema, so you make sure that Google understands what is this topic about, or what's this website about. So
sorry, I was going to say, we did speak about this just before the show, where we were actually thinking of putting all this down into a white paper, because it is something that you actually really need to be able to refer back to. Obviously, that's going to come towards the end of the month when we've covered all the bits we need to cover, and we've got some results back from the tests that we're doing at the moment. But yeah, definitely, we need to get some good practices, some review sites out there for you to go, and some of the sites that Henrik's talked about today, where he's been testing, you know, we'll be name dropping those as well over time. And yeah, like I say, yeah, it's big snippets fit and all those things. It's all, in a way, it's all the same categorization, and it's all down to the same stuff, and they just keep changing the names for everything anyway. So, but it definitely applies, doesn't it? Yeah.
And don't forget, guys, hit that subscribe button, because then you will be notified about any unnoticed shows that we might do in between. We sometimes just jump on to a live session and drop a few nuggets. So subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you enjoy. Comments in the comment section if you have any comments, and we'll try to answer those. And don't forget to hit the like button as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you next week.